Hello, everyone. It's Jeff. Due to the positive feedback I got from yesterday's video, this one is going to be all about rock biographies and autobiographies. And I'll show a couple of records at the end because I got a few in the mail today. The tradition of me reading rock books, bios, autobios, goes back almost as long as I've listened to music. I've got 10 books here that have all come out probably within the last 5 years. I think the oldest one is 5 years old. And they cover a pretty good range of artists. A lot of them, of course, are going to be classic rock artists because that's my primary interest, but hopefully there's some books here that look interesting to you guys. This is just what I've been reading over the last few years in the rock bio genre. The first one that I'm going to show is Fire and Rain. The Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, James Taylor, CSNY, and the Lost Story of 1970. Obviously, that's a mouthful for a title, but it basically tells you just what this book's about. It crisscrosses among these four artists making their respective albums. The Beatles were in the process of breaking up while making Let It Be. Simon and Garfunkel were breaking up while making Bridge Over Troubled Water. And then you had James Taylor, who was just becoming a big star, making Sweet Baby James, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young making the Deja Vu album. Interspersed among these four stories, author David Brown goes into like what was going on culturally and politically in 1970, and kind of giving a good context for everything that happened that year, and these were probably four of the biggest albums that were released that year. So you kind of had the optimistic 60s change into the darker cynicism of the 70s. And of course you had the whole birth of the singer-songwriter movement, and James Taylor's the king of that. So this was a pretty good read. Like I said, it's not... you're not going to get every microscopic detail about these four acts, but as a good general overview, this was a pretty good read. This next one is about another bygone era that probably will never return. VJ, The Unplugged Adventures of MTV's First Wave. If you're a certain age, like I am, you remember when MTV first came out. I got cable TV probably in the fifth or sixth grade, I think, and had MTV not long after it started up. So I used to watch religiously, and it didn't matter if the same video had been on 100 times or not. I still watched it, and it almost became like the radio after a while. So this book is about how MTV started, and about the first probably 5 or 10 years of MTV. It covers some of the VJs that came after these five. And if you remember MTV, how it used to be when they actually played music videos, the MTV is a very different animal nowadays. But this will be a good read for you. Earlier this year, I spent jury duty. I had to go to jury duty. And I took this book, which I just got at the time, Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. And I ended up not getting called for any juries that day. So I curled up in a corner and I read all day long, and it was awesome. So... and I did my civic duty too. So there you go. This book is very conversationally written. it's it's like Bruce is just sitting there talking to you, telling you about his life. Um, it's a decent sized book. I mean, it took me a little while to get through this one, but it's uh, it's probably one of the ones I would recommend the most or the highest out of these 10. This one was a very good read, and if you're a Springsteen fan at all, it's definitely worth reading. It covers his entire life from his very early days with his early bands up to the present. So this is a good one. And then I have, following that, Who I Am by Pete Townsend. If you are a fan at all of The Who or Pete Townsend, as I am, this is definitely a absorbing book. I didn't learn a ton of new details about The Who, but about Pete and his solo career and his life before and after The Who, and all during their breakups and reformings and breakups and reformings. It was pretty interesting. So yeah, it's if you're remotely interested at all in Townsend or The Who, this is definitely worth it. Another one that I got on the first day of its release was Elvis Costello's Unfaithful Music and Disappearing Ink. This is another one that's very conversational in tone. It's not a strictly chronological telling of his life. It jumps around a little bit, but it's pretty well written, and Costello is not shy about exposing all of his inner thoughts and feelings and poking holes in them, basically. While I'm not, I'm a big fan of Elvis Costello, but I mean, I don't love every single thing he's done over the years. But he's a good enough musician and songwriter to go into any genre and do whatever he wants with authority. So there's not too many guys like this left anymore. But this is also a fairly long book, but it's well worth your time. Another book that is also well worth your time is this one by John Fogerty called Fortunate Son. The very first rock concert I ever took my dad to was a John Fogerty concert. And I grew up listening to CCR and Fogerty almost as much as I did Johnny Cash when I was a little kid. He's one of the all-time greats as far as I'm concerned, and this book is a little more depressing than some of these other ones, especially after CCR broke up, because Fogerty signed the worst record contract in the world. No kidding. And he spent years and years fighting in court with his record company, Fantasy Records, and the owner. And most likely really deprived us of potential albums that we could have got from him if he wasn't tied up in court and fighting with his bandmates. We've gotten a lot of the other side of the story from his bandmates and his record label, and this is really where John Fogerty gives his side of the story and kind of sets the record straight in a lot of respects about what his thoughts were and where he was coming from. But yeah, he if you, like I said, it's not always a feel-good book. I mean, things do turn out in the end, but boy, he just shouldn't have signed that record deal when he did. Who knows what we could have gotten, but yeah, this is a good read too. I need a drink. Water. I still have to work this week, so no booze. Not yet. All right. Man on the Run. Paul McCartney in the 70s. is, just like it says in the title, it's all about Paul after he left the Beatles in 1970 and became a solo act and started Wings and eventually turned them into arena rock giants. And it's a good, like I say, it's a slice of his life. It's not a complete history of his life. It's just what he was doing in the 70s. So if you're a little curious about McCartney after the Beatles, this would be a good place for you to go. And like I said, it's not a very, I don't think I said it the first time, it's not a very long book, so it's a quick read. And of course I'm a fan of McCartney, so there's a few, it gave a few new details about what he was like in the 70s for him. He seemed to take the longest to find his feet out of the four Beatles after they broke up, but once he did, he basically never looked back. So this is a transitional period for Paul. So that's what makes this book pretty interesting. Okay, we got 3 left, and 2 of them are related. The first being Gregg Allman's My Cross to Bear. Just like the Fogarty book, this one is a little more on the depressing side for the simple reason, I mean, if you know anything about the history of Gregg Allman and the Allman Brothers, you know that there's a lot of sadness and death going on there. I mean, and Gregg Allman's addictions were legendary, and he's not shy about telling you about them in this book. So him overcoming that and being able to get some kind of peace and stability towards the later years of his life was very good, a very inspirational thing to read. So if for nothing else, and this is a good story too, because I'm a big fan of Gregg Allman. Related to that book is one about the entire band, One Way Out. I actually found this one a little more interesting reading about them after the Duane glory years. I mean, I pretty much knew their story of how they formed and how they came up and how they got famous, and of course Duane's death and Barry Oakley's death. But when they broke up in 1976 and Greg ended up testifying against, I think it was their road manager, that really drove a wedge between him and the band, and I just found it a little more interesting. I knew less about that part of their career before they reunited in the 70s and then broke up and then reunited again in the 80s and then broke up and then reunited again. So the years after Duane made this well worth reading for me. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Gregg Allman and the Allman Brothers. So between this book and his solo one, you're pretty much going to learn everything you need to know about Greg and the Allman Brothers band. And finally, this one out of these 10 is probably my favorite out of all of them. It's called The Universal Tone by Carlos Santana. Reading this book and finding out a lot about his life and him coming up and forming Santana and becoming famous and going through his spiritual journeys that he did in the 70s and 80s was very absorbing. This is probably the longest book of the bunch, but it goes by very fast. Once I got into it, I couldn't put it down. And Carlos Santana comes off as a very humble guy, very un-rock star-like, very ego-free, which is very refreshing. I can't lie to you. A lot of these books I showed you, you get a sense of the stars, more than healthy ego in a lot of cases. But it's not like that with this one. And if you were only going to pick one book out of these 10, this would be the one I would recommend the most. If you like Santana at all, and of course I love Santana, the band, this will make you want to get all their albums if you didn't have them already, which I almost do. And if you already have all their albums, you want to listen to them all over again. So, can't say enough good things about this one, the Universal Tone by Carlos Santana. Whew, okay. I did that in 15 minutes, which was better than my last video. Which gives me time to show you 4 records I got in the mail today. First one I bought for my wife is by Yaz, called Upstairs at Eric's. The only song I know about this, song I know off of this one is called Don't Go, and I'm sure if you heard it, you would recognize it too. It's this is one of my wife's all-time favorite albums. So I saw this, and I won it on eBay for her. So, and I like the one song that I know. So the rest of this album will be new to me. So we'll see how it goes. Let me show you just the back cover real quick. So yeah, Yes, Upstairs at Eric's was the first one. The next 2 are both by the same band. XTC. This one is called White Music. This was, I don't know if this was their very first album or not, but it was one of their first. And it's a cutout album. You can see the little notch down there. I've always liked XTC. I've always liked that quirky pop style of theirs. And I've acquired several of their albums over the last few months. I'm trying to get a whole run of them, and they've been a little tough. It's been hard to find these, and when I do, it's hard to win them. So I was glad to get this one. And along with that, I also got a copy of Drums and Wires. What's on this one? Generals and Majors, I think, is on this one, isn't it? I think so. But yeah, this was another kind of sort of difficult one to get. Show the back here. I'm probably going to do what I call listening projects and just take a day and just listen to all their albums in a row, back to back to back to back. So there could be a video like that in the future. I've done the same thing with Neil Young. I've got probably 7 or 8 of his albums from probably the mid-70s up to Ragged Glory in 1990. So there could be some listening project videos coming, but that's going to have to wait until I have a lot of free time. But Drums and Wires was the 3rd album that I got. And the last one. I'll have to show you the record on this as well. When you see it, you may know why. It's Rock and Roll Animal by Lou Reed. I'm not a huge fan of Lou Reed. There's the back cover. But what I do like of his, I like a lot. And I've heard snippets of this album over the years. And I came across this one. And it was another eBay auction that I ended up winning for a good price. So I grabbed it. It's a gatefold as well, as you can see. But since it was released in 1974 on RCA Records, that means it's a Dynaflex album. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Dynaflex was a type of vinyl, and you can see how thin it is, that RCA used as a way to try to conserve vinyl because there was a shortage of it in the 70s, I know. I don't know if any other record label used Dynaflex, but the sound on these albums is okay. I don't know if we're really talking audiophile quality or not, but they're probably a step, maybe a step and a half above a flexi disc. And we're talking, that's how flimsy these things are. You sure couldn't do this with a 180 gram album, that's for sure. So it's, I mean, it's in decent shape. It needs a cleaning, but I just thought I'd show it to you guys if you recognize or maybe you remember Dynaflex when it came out in the 70s. This also meant that a lot of Bowie's albums in the 70s were on Dynaflex, and I have a few of those. And I mean, the sound is okay. It's all subjective. I mean, you might think it sounds great. Somebody else might think it sounds like crap. I mean, if it's in good condition, it'll probably sound okay. This will probably be okay. But like I said, don't do this at home, kids. These are very flimsy. Okay, and there you have it. I didn't think I would be making this video so soon after my last one, but thank you all for making it to the end if you did. After 21 and a half minutes, I appreciate it. And just like I said yesterday, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And I'll probably won't see you till next week because with the holidays and everything, I doubt I'll have time to make any more of these until then. But until then, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. And I'll see you again soon. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.